Good morning, everyone. I'm recording something a little bit different today. It's a tribute to two men that I knew that fought in World War I. Yes, World War I, over 100 years ago. I'm old enough to know people that participated in that war. What you're looking at here is the attestation paper of Ralph Overholt. He joined the 119th Overseas Battalion on February 17, 1916. You can see the details there about his life at that point in time. He was a 22-year-old accountant living in Princeton, Ontario when war broke out in 1914. On February 17, 1916, when he was 23, Ralph enlisted to serve in the Canadian Expeditionary Force. He fought in France, first as a private and later as a sergeant, and survived the war, which is a rare thing for a non-commissioned officer. He returned to live in North Bay, where his father lived. Ralph had a wife and at least one son that I knew of. He and I met when I was about 14. My father had cleared Ralph's driveway of snow every winter for a number of years, and he suggested I might want to talk to Ralph about helping him in the summertime with his gardening and general yard work. Ralph was in his 80s and had a weak heart. I needed money, Ralph needed help, so it was a good match. While I would work in the summer sun, Ralph would sit in the shade with a cool drink and a sun hat, observing me and giving directions where needed. He taught me everything I know about gardening, composting, and getting a stubborn motor to start by adding methyl hydrate to the fuel. To casual observers in the neighborhood, Ralph was a crusty old guy who would chase the neighborhood kids off his lawn. But to me, he was a kind old man with a past that he wouldn't share. In the spring, he would be noticeably sad. He seemed to suffer nightmares at that time and would never share details, but you knew he was troubled by his memories almost 60 years after the fact. He didn't pay the ultimate price, but he did suffer emotionally for the rest of his life. This is the attestation paper of George Nicol, another veteran that I knew. I was his paper boy when I was about 12 or 13, and around that time he moved into a house right across the street from me. This provided me with a new source of income from George, because I could shovel his driveway and cut his grass. George would have done it himself, except his right arm was messed up. He only really had half an arm. You wouldn't notice it. When you saw him, he had both arms, two hands. The hands both seemed to work, but he had no muscle in his upper arm. A shell had blown off his bicep in World War I. He could open and close his hands, so there were nerves coming to the arm. He just couldn't use the arm except for opening and closing his hand. He couldn't lift the arm. He couldn't lift things with that arm. So whenever I feel that things are troubling me a little bit, I consider George and the things he went through. George lived in Port Arthur when the war broke out, now called Thunder Bay. There was a lot of excitement about the war, and every able-bodied young man was expected to do his part. George told me how the young women in town would pin white feathers on the lapels of any young man who looked like he should be overseas. And George said, and I'm paraphrasing, there was no goddamn way I was getting a white feather to show that I was a coward. So, at the age of 17, George lied about his age and enlisted so he could avoid the shame. You'll notice, on his paper, his date of birth shows 1898. 1899 is the year he was actually born. So he was 17 when he joined up. Went to Europe, fought in the trenches. When he got hit, he had to walk himself back to the aid station to reach medical treatment. The doctor said he was lucky he didn't get gangrene from having an exposed wound for such a long time. It took him a while to get there, in fact so long that maggots had entered the wound during his trek, and the maggots kept the wound clean. That's what the doctors attribute to him not losing the arm. After the war, he returned to North Bay and raised a family. He lived until the age of 97, and he was the last living World War I veteran in North Bay at the time. Now, I share my story of these two men because this is how I like to mark Remembrance Day. I'll sit down and reflect on the lives of them and the price they paid in order to fight for the freedoms we now enjoy. Today, I thought I should share these thoughts with you, share my memories of these two men. I'm almost 60 years old, and I'm one of the fewer and fewer people that have a connection to folks that actually fought in that war. I think it's important that those of you that are younger than me get to hear the story too. But these are just two men that I knew directly. There were lots more when I was young. When I was a kid, I remember walking downtown and you'd see people like this guy we called the Button Man. He had a great coat that was covered in buttons he'd collected over the years, and he just wandered around downtown North Bay. There were men with broken bodies. At all the Remembrance Day ceremonies, you'd see people missing a leg, an arm, maybe multiple limbs. And for me as a kid, that was just the way it was. You saw these people and you said, oh, well, they got hurt in the war. As an adult now, though, I look back and I think to myself, quite a sacrifice and a lifelong memory of terrible things haunted them through their lives. Now, as I mentioned, it's easy for someone in my generation to understand how difficult war is, not because I was there, but because I knew men that were there. I had direct contact with survivors, and I think it's important that I share these memories to the generations that follow me. There are no World War I veterans left, and soon there will be no more World War II veterans. But there's a new generation of vets who've seen terrible things while either peacekeeping or peacemaking in places like Serbia, Bosnia, Afghanistan, and any number of other missions. They also deserve our respect for putting themselves in danger to help provide a better existence for the people in those regions and indirectly for the people in our country. So, on days when you're bogged down by all that petty stuff that really doesn't matter, clear your minds. Remember, you live in a great country that was put together by the men and women who came before us. You should live a good life as thanks for the sacrifices made by these men and women who came before us. They've given us a life filled with possibilities. Neither George nor Ralph died in the war, but they both lived very different lives because of the war.